Today we will talk about globalization. We will start by answering the question, what is globalization? The globalization of markets entails the integration of once distinct national markets into a vast global marketplace, facilitated by reduced trade barriers. This phenomenon is exemplified by the convergence of consumer preferences towards global norms, as illustrated by widely recognized brands like Citigroup, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's. While multinational corporations play a significant role in this trend, smaller firms also contribute substantially to global market expansion through exports. Despite the prevalence of global brands, differences persist among national markets in terms of consumer preferences, distribution channels, and regulatory frameworks, necessitating tailored marketing strategies. The most global markets primarily involve industrial goods and materials, catering to universal needs worldwide. Competitions between major firms like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, or Ford and Toyota, transcend national boundaries, leading to a more homogenized global marketplace. This trend towards global market integration is reshaping traditional notions of distinct national market. The globalization of production involves sourcing goods and services globally to capitalize on differences in the cost and quality of production factors such as labor, energy, and capital. Companies aim to reduce costs or enhance product quality and functionality to remain competitive. Boeing, for instance, outsources large portions of its aircraft production to foreign suppliers, such as Japanese companies, for its 777 and 787 models, to benefit from specialized expertise and increase its global market share. Initially, outsourcing focused on manufacturing, but it has expanded to include service activities like radiology work and software testing. Technology, particularly the Internet, has enabled companies to outsource tasks to lower-cost countries, reducing development time and expenses. For example, U.S. hospitals outsource radiology to India, and software companies like Microsoft use Indian engineers for testing. This global outsourcing trend has led to the creation of global products that blur national distinctions. However, challenges remain, including trade barriers, foreign investment restrictions, transportation costs, economic and political risks, and coordination difficulties. Despite these hurdles, globalization of markets and production is expected to continue as companies adapt to evolving global conditions. The emergence of global institutions. Institutions are important to help manage, regulate, and police the global marketplace. Some key global institutions include General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations. We talk about each institution in some detail. The World Trade Organization, WTO, plays a crucial role in regulating and facilitating international trade. Here's a breakdown of its functions. Polices the world trading system. The WTO monitors and enforces trade agreements between member nations. It investigates trade disputes and can impose trade sanctions on countries that violate the rules. Ensures nation-states adhere to the rules. The WTO ensures that member nations comply with the agreed-upon trade rules and regulations. This helps to create a level playing field for all participating countries. Facilitates multinational agreements among members. The WTO provides a platform for countries to negotiate and agree upon new trade agreements. This can help to reduce trade barriers and promote economic growth. As of 2019, the WTO had 164 member nations, representing 98% of global trade. This demonstrates the organization's significant influence on the international trading system. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were established in 1944 by 44 nations at the Bretton Woods Conference. The IMF's primary role is to maintain stability in the international monetary system, while the World Bank focuses on promoting economic development by providing low-interest loans to poor nations for infrastructure projects. The World Bank is less controversial, as its efforts are geared toward helping developing countries improve infrastructure, such as roads and dams. The IMF, however, acts as a lender of last resort for nations facing economic crises, such as currency devaluation or severe financial instability. Over the past few decades, it has provided financial support to countries like Argentina, Mexico, South Korea, and Turkey, and played a key role in assisting nations during the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. However, IMF loans come with conditions, requiring countries to implement specific economic policies to restore stability. These conditions have been criticized for being inappropriate or for infringing on national sovereignty, as the IMF is seen by some as dictating domestic economic policies. The United Nations, UN, was founded on October 24, 1945, by 51 countries with a shared goal of maintaining peace through international cooperation and collective security. Today, the UN has 193 member countries, making it a near-universal organization. When nations join, they agree to the principles outlined in the UN Charter, an international treaty governing global relations. The UN has four main purposes: maintaining international peace and security, fostering friendly relations among nations, solving international problems, promoting human rights, and harmonizing global actions. While the UN is widely known for its peacekeeping efforts, a significant part of its mission, around 70% of its work, focuses on improving living standards, promoting employment, and fostering social and economic development. These efforts are seen as crucial to creating the conditions necessary for lasting global peace. The UN collaborates with institutions like the World Bank to achieve these goals, driven by the belief that eradicating poverty and enhancing well-being are essential for sustainable peace. The Group of 20, G20, established in 1999, is an international forum composed of finance ministers and central bank governors from the 19 largest economies, along with representatives from the European Union and the European Central Bank. Together, the G20 represents about 90% of global GDP and 80% of international trade. Initially formed to develop coordinated policy responses to financial crises in developing nations, the G20 gained prominence during the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. It became the key platform where major economies collaborated to address the economic recession, the most severe since 1981, which began in the US and quickly spread worldwide. During the 1920s and 1930s, many nations imposed high barriers to international trade and foreign direct investment, leading to retaliatory trade policies that exacerbated the Great Depression. Post-World War II, Western industrial nations committed to reducing trade barriers through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. GATT's negotiations, spanning from 1948 to the Uruguay Round in 1993, significantly lowered average tariff rates for manufactured goods. The Uruguay Round extended GATT to cover services, enhanced intellectual property protections, and established the World Trade Organization, WTO, to monitor the global trading system. Despite recent trade disputes, tariff rates have generally decreased globally, aided by bilateral and regional agreements like the EU, NAFTA/ASEAN, and the South Korea Free Trade Agreement, which collectively contribute to a more interconnected global trade landscape. Between 1960 and 2020, the value of the global economy and international trade in goods significantly increased, with trade growing faster than world output. The value of world trade in merchandise reached $17.5 trillion by 2020, with an additional $4.7 trillion in trade in services. Foreign direct investment has also surged due to reduced barriers, peaking at $1.5 trillion in 2019. The trend of rising trade implies increased interdependence among nations, economic growth, and heightened competition. While globalization has spurred economic development, challenges persist, with calls for protectionism echoing since the 2008 financial crisis. Recent events like the COVID-19 pandemic have disrupted global supply chains, prompting some firms to consider reshoring production. These shifts may impact the pace of globalization as nations navigate trade policies amidst evolving global challenges. The lowering of trade barriers has facilitated the globalization of markets and production, with technological advancements playing a crucial role in making this a reality. Key innovations, such as the microprocessor, have significantly enhanced computing power and information processing capabilities, transforming global communications. Advances in satellite, optical fiber, wireless technologies, and the Internet have revolutionized how information is transmitted and decoded across the globe. The Internet, which experienced explosive growth since 1994, has become a cornerstone of global communications and commerce. From less than 1 million users in 1990 to nearly 5 billion users by 2020, the Internet has become an essential tool in the global economy. E-commerce has particularly benefited from the Internet's expansion, with North America witnessing $800 billion in e-commerce retail sales in 2020, and global e-commerce sales reaching close to $4 trillion. The COVID-19 pandemic further accelerated the growth of e-commerce in 2020. The Internet has democratized access to information and commerce, breaking down traditional barriers of location, scale, and time zones. It enables businesses of all sizes to connect with buyers worldwide, facilitating global expansion at a reduced cost. Additionally, the Internet empowers enterprises to efficiently manage globally dispersed production systems, a feat not feasible 3 decades ago. Since the 1950s, significant advancements in transportation technology, notably the development of commercial jet aircraft and containerization, have played pivotal roles in globalization. Commercial jet travel has effectively reduced distances between locations, making New York closer to Tokyo in travel time than to Philadelphia in colonial times. Containerization, a key innovation, has revolutionized the transportation industry by simplifying transshipment processes, substantially cutting costs, and enhancing efficiency. Before containerization, Transferring goods between transport modes was labor-intensive and time-consuming, requiring days and numerous workers. However, with widespread adoption in the 1970s and 1980s, the process became streamlined, executed by a fraction of workers in a couple of days. This efficiency surge substantially reduced transportation costs, making global shipping more economical and propelling the globalization of markets and production. Between 1920 and 1990, average ocean freight charges dropped from $95 to $29 per ton of U.S. export and import cargo, underscoring the cost benefits of containerization. Presently, transporting a 20-foot container with over 20 tons of cargo from Asia to Europe costs roughly the same as the economy airfare for a single passenger on the same route, showcasing the affordability and impact of containerized shipping. Okay, now the changing demographics of the global economy, the changing world output and world trade picture. The global economic landscape has undergone significant shifts since the 1960s, with the United States experiencing a relative decline in its share of world output and exports, despite its economy growing substantially. This trend is mirrored in other developed nations such as Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Canada, all of which were early global industrializers. The rise of economies like China, Japan, South Korea, and others in Asia has led to a redistribution of economic power, challenging the traditional dominance of the U.S. As emerging economies like the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, continue to grow, forecasts indicate a further decline in the share of world output held by established developed nations. The World Bank predicts that by 2030, developing nations could account for over 60% of global economic activity, marking a substantial shift in the economic geography of the world. This transformation presents new opportunities and competition for international businesses, emphasizing the importance of adapting to this evolving economic landscape. In the 1960s, U.S. firms held a dominant position in global foreign direct investment (FDI) flows, comprising 66.3% of the total, with British and Japanese firms trailing behind significantly. As barriers to international trade diminished and other nations grew economically, non-U.S. companies increasingly engaged in cross-border investments, aiming to optimize production locations and establish a presence in foreign markets. European and Japanese firms, starting in the 1970s, began relocating labor-intensive manufacturing to developing countries and investing in North America and Europe to hedge against currency fluctuations and trade barriers. The data in this figure highlights a substantial rise in outward FDI stock over time, indicating a growing reliance of firms on foreign activities for revenues and profits, showcasing the interconnected nature of the global economy. Since the 1990s, there has been a significant increase in cross-border FDI flows, with developing nations, particularly China, emerging as key recipients of foreign investments, stimulating economic growth in these countries and underscoring the trend of international business expansion towards developing markets. The changing nature of the multinational enterprise. Over the past 50 years, the landscape of multinational enterprises, MNEs, has seen two significant trends: the ascent of non-US multinationals and the proliferation of mini-multinationals. Initially, in the 1960s, US multinational corporations held sway in global business, with US firms dominating foreign direct investment. However, by 2003, a shift was evident, with Forbes' ranking showcasing a decline in the US share to 28.8% and the emergence of Chinese enterprises, accounting for 15.5% of the top multinationals. This trend continued through 2019, indicating a diversification of powerful MNE's home bases, foretelling a future where firms from developing nations will increasingly challenge the traditional dominance of North American and European companies on the global stage. This evolving dynamic not only reflects a changing economic landscape, but also underscores the rising competitiveness of companies from emerging markets like China, Taiwan, India, and South Korea. The evolution of international business has witnessed the rise of small and medium-sized multinationals, often referred to as mini-multinationals, alongside the well-known large corporations dominating the global stage. While giants like ExxonMobil and Sony typically come to mind in discussions about international business, smaller enterprises are increasingly engaging in global trade and investment, aided by the Internet's role in breaking down barriers to international markets. Examples such as Lubricating Systems Inc., a modest-sized manufacturer from Kent, Washington, which derives a significant portion of its revenue from exports to various countries, and Lixie Inc., a small U.S. manufacturer with substantial export earnings from Japan, highlight the growing participation of smaller players in international commerce. GW Bath, a German manufacturer with a niche market dominance, further demonstrates that international business is no longer the exclusive domain of large corporations, but also encompasses medium-sized and small enterprises making their mark on the global stage. Between 1989 and 1991, a wave of democratic revolutions reshaped the communist world, leading to the collapse of Communist Party governments in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union's fragmentation into independent republics. This transformative period opened up export and investment prospects in previously isolated regions, although challenges persist as some areas exhibit authoritarian tendencies. Shifts towards state intervention in economic activities and political unrest have been observed in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, including Russia, posing risks for international businesses. Concurrently, China's economic reforms present both opportunities and threats, balancing economic liberalization with political control. In Latin America, democratization and free market reforms have improved economic conditions, attracting foreign investment. Yet instances of state intervention in industries, notably in Venezuela, underscore the importance of carefully assessing risks in these evolving markets. Over the past 25 years, the global economy has witnessed significant transformations, with decreasing barriers to the flow of goods, services, and capital, propelling nations like South Korea and Taiwan into major economic players across various industries. The trend towards a more global economic system has been reinforced by the adoption of liberal economic policies by countries that were previously staunch opponents. However, the future trajectory of globalization remains uncertain, with the possibility of countries retracting from liberal economic ideologies if outcomes fail to align with expectations. Instances like Russia's shift away from liberal economics highlight potential challenges for international businesses in a less globalized landscape. Moreover, greater globalization brings inherent risks, exemplified by financial crises like those in the late 1990s and the 2008 to 2009 global recession, triggered by the US financial sector's lax lending practices. These events underscore the interconnectedness of economies and the potential for crises in one region to have global repercussions. While globalization offers expanded business opportunities, firms must navigate associated risks, especially in the face of rising nationalistic sentiments in certain countries, emphasizing the importance of hedging strategies to mitigate uncertainties in an evolving global economic environment. The ongoing shift towards a more integrated and interdependent global economy is a subject of debate among influential economists, politicians, and business leaders. Proponents argue that reduced barriers to international trade and investment drive global prosperity by lowering prices, stimulating economic growth, increasing consumer incomes, and creating jobs across participating nations. Despite a compelling body of evidence supporting these claims, globalization faces criticism, with vocal opponents taking to the streets and some gaining political power, such as Donald Trump with his America First stance challenging multilateral international order. While protests against globalization have occurred worldwide, from Seattle to France, concerns about its impact on living standards, wage rates, and the environment persist. However, evidence suggests that many of these fears may be overstated, as globalization has brought higher living standards to many countries, despite facing resistance from some segments of society mourning the loss of cultural diversity amid global integration. Critics of globalization often voice concerns that decreasing barriers to international trade lead to the loss of manufacturing jobs in wealthy advanced economies like the United States and Western Europe. They argue that firms relocate manufacturing operations to countries with lower wage rates, resulting in wage depression in developed nations. Anecdotal evidence, such as the case of Harwood Industries moving operations from the US to Honduras for cheaper labor, supports these fears. Additionally, the outsourcing of services to countries with lower labor costs has fueled worries about job exportation and rising unemployment. While globalization opponents attribute declining unskilled wage rates to the offshoring of low-wage jobs, proponents offer a more nuanced perspective. They suggest that technological advancements within advanced economies, which favor skilled labor over unskilled labor, play a more significant role in income inequality. The solution to this issue, they propose, lies in increased investment in education to address the oversupply of unskilled workers. Moreover, as developing nations like China experience rapid economic growth, the wage gap between developed and developing countries is narrowing, indicating a potential shift towards a more balanced global economy, where current job migrations could be temporary adjustments in a more integrated economic landscape. Critics of globalization raise concerns that free trade encourages advanced nations' firms to relocate manufacturing to less developed countries with weak regulations, potentially leading to labor exploitation and increased pollution. This argument was prominent during debates surrounding NAFTA, suggesting that firms might prioritize profits over environmental and labor standards. However, proponents of free trade propose that economic progress typically results in stricter regulations as countries become wealthier. They argue that free trade can drive improved environmental and labor conditions by fostering economic growth and innovation. While challenges persist, such as rising carbon emissions, advocates of free trade suggest solutions like implementing a carbon tax to limit pollution without stifling economic growth. Despite ongoing global discussions on reducing carbon emissions, some progress has been made through agreements like the Paris Accord. Additionally, supporters of free trade advocate for linking trade agreements with enhanced environmental and labor standards, as demonstrated by NAFTA's side agreements aimed at enforcing environmental protections in Mexico. They counter the notion that businesses solely aim to exploit labor, contending that most firms prioritize ethical conduct and productivity, suggesting that well-treated workforces are more efficient, thus challenging the narrative of companies relocating for exploitative purposes. The last slide we have is managing in the global marketplace. As the global economy becomes more integrated, managers within international businesses face distinct challenges compared to those managing solely domestic operations. These differences stem from the unique cultural, political, economic, legal, and developmental variations among countries. International businesses must adapt their strategies on a country-by-country basis, considering factors such as marketing approaches, workforce management techniques, and government relations. Notably, unforeseen events like natural disasters, political conflicts, terrorist attacks, and pandemics such as SARS in 2003 and COVID-19 in 2019 have shown how quickly disruptions can occur across international supply chains, affecting businesses that rely on global trade. The COVID-19 pandemic, in particular, highlighted the vulnerabilities of interconnected economies, leading to widespread economic turmoil and trade disturbances worldwide. Despite ongoing challenges, the development of vaccines offers hope for controlling the pandemic's impact. Interestingly, China's management of the crisis has positioned it favorably compared to other nations, potentially impacting its global standing in the post-pandemic era.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe to channel.